Introduction. Culture is fast. Evolution is slow. On a splendid late summer morning in the year 10,327 BC, Fej Onsark set out on a quest for food. Long before humans stalked the Serengeti of Facebook, hunter-gatherers like Fej foraged the savanna and forests for fruit, seeds, nuts, and tubers. If the gods were smiling, his stone-tipped spear might even penetrate the belly of an odd-toed ungulate. For Fej and his tribe, grilled wildebeest was a coveted addition to the specials menu. Fej lived on the plains of East Africa in an area now known as Kenya. As autumn approached, the dry climate of the savanna produced a variety of delectable fruits, including African star apples, baobabs, tamarinds, jackalberries, and figs. 5 miles from camp, to his great delight, Fej stumbled upon a marvelous copse of Barbary fig trees. The trees were so laden with ripe reddish teardrops that they appeared to be weeping. Fej ravaged the figs, stuffing his satchel full until its skin stretched tight. He proudly brought them back to his village, where the tribe gorged exuberantly on the figs until all that remained was a small mountain of stems and leaves in the center of the dining circle. Fej returned to the grove the following day with recruits who ransacked the remaining trees. They hauled a great bounty of figs to the tribe, who once more devoured them with reckless abandon. After a week of great abundance, Fej found his loincloth to be a bit tighter around his midsection. He didn't judge himself. His little paunch would come in handy soon enough, as the scarcity of the upcoming winter loomed just around the seasonal corner. In Fej's time, getting chubby in the autumn wasn't a bug in the system. It was an adaptive feature. Adipose tissue may be vilified in today's culture, but fat is merely stored energy warehoused in adipocytes for a rainy day. When there is a caloric deficit, fat gets burned by our mitochondria, the power plants of our cells. Across massive swaths of time, humans evolved in relationship with their environment. The ability to withstand the paucity of winter's fallow was coded in the human genome. We were engineered to be a little fat in the fall. This genetic adaptation that was once beneficial for survival has now become detrimental. Today, in too much of the world, a surfeit of shelf-stable calories is a mere finger tap away any time of day, any time of year. In turn, our bodies keep storing fat for a winter that never comes. The ready availability of calories, particularly in the suitcase of ultra-processed food, has led to an obesity epidemic. Nearly 80% of Americans are overweight, 45% are obese, 11% are morbidly obese. While these numbers are staggering, they shouldn't be surprising. They are the normal and expected results of our Paleolithic genome simply trying to cope with the way we live. The misalignment between our current consumption behavior and the way our bodies were designed reflects only one of many incompatibilities of modernity. In so many respects, our lifestyle and our engineering are mismatched. It's not just what we eat, but how we move, what we wear, and where and how we live and work. The conveniences that we have carefully constructed as the hallmarks of civilization are slowly but surely killing us. Our biology has been hijacked by the comfort trap. Fej Onsark, my name spelled backwards for those who are curious, is my mythical great-great-great times 600 grandfather. He lived as a hunter-gatherer, like his father and his father's father, and his father's father's father. Fej, like hundreds of generations before him and after him, endured significant environmental discomforts. He was an opportunistic omnivore, eating 800 different plants, seeds, nuts, tubers, and occasional wild game, but was also forced to withstand periods of food scarcity. He endured bouts of extreme heat and cold, relying only on his internal thermostat to maintain temperature homeostasis. He lifted heavy things. He walked and walked and walked. He lived primarily outside, woke with the sun, squatted, and wore minimal footwear. You could say Fedge lived with the hippies, HIPPIES, health-imparting Paleolithic period inconvenient environmental stressors. That's a mouthful. Fedge's way of life was the norm for 200,000 years, and across this unfathomable stretch of time, Homo sapiens developed adaptive mechanisms in relation to environmental adversity. This phenomenon is known as hormesis, a positive physiological or psychological response to stress. Adversity did more than just keep Fedge lean. In the right dosage, it conferred resilience and activated longevity pathways. Fedge and I share virtually the same exact biology. In fact, give him a shave, some jeans, and walk him down Main Street, and no one even bats an eye. But while our genome may be virtually identical, the cultures in which we live could not be more different. You and I live in very different circumstances than old Fedge. We live in an ecosystem characterized by what I call the Big Macs. No, not just the ones that you buy at the Evil M. I'm talking about the big, modern, American conveniences. On a whim and from the palm of my hand, I can order up any type of ultra-processed food stuff on a 365-day-per-year basis. I can get a summer squash delivered to my front door within an hour, in the winter. That said, what gets ordered on Uber Eats rarely resembles a vegetable. What conveniently shows up at your doorstep is the convenience food that leads to inconvenient truths. Like most denizens of modernity, I slump sedentary at a desk for 8 hours per day, recording this audio in a climate-controlled office. The norm in our culture is to spend a mere 6% of our time outdoors and to live largely alone, often in gated communities, single-family homes, or vertical boxes. Oh, we denizens of modernity enjoy 24/7 on-demand entertainment, wrap our feet in padded plastic, and lounge about in cushy armchairs. Over the past century and a half, our lifestyle has been engineered for ever-increasing ease and comfort. In an evolutionary blink of an eye, culture has usurped our adaptive mechanisms and rendered them maladaptive. The Big Macs, the overabundance of nutrient-deficient, highly caloric food, our incessant eating cycle, blue light exposure, temperature neutrality, sedentariness, technology, individualism, and other creature comforts have upended our hard-wrought evolutionary advantages. Culture evolves at a pace much faster than our genes. Biologically, we are designed for a world that no longer exists. Culture is fast. Evolution is slow. The result is a panoply of evolutionary mismatches that are making us sick. That is the comfort trap. While it's true that Fedge's life expectancy was less than half of mine, his abbreviated lifespan was primarily due to infant mortality, the inability to treat infection, and the spread of communicable diseases. Indeed, modern medicine has made great progress in these respects. However, no one in Fedge's tribe had heart disease or diabetes or dementia. Cancer was extremely rare. Fatty liver disease, kidney disease, autoimmune diseases, and mental disorders like ADHD, autism, PTSD, and others were virtually non-existent. If Fedge and us are wearing the same genes, so to speak, why are we so sick with chronic disease? The answer is simple and obvious. It's our lifestyle. Our culture of chronic ease is creating an epidemic of chronic dis-ease. In the following tracks, I will leverage veg as the benchmark for comparing ancient and modern living conditions. I will outline modernity's comfort-induced evolutionary mismatches and their knock-on physiological and psychological impacts. And I will describe how technology and innovation, from the invention of air conditioning and the light bulb to the proliferation of smartphones and sneakers, have undermined human health. In my full-length book and online course, Good Stress, I go deep into the protocols, benefits, and the science of self-imposed stress. In this audio, I will provide some basic suggestions for how we can address modernity's death trap of comfort by living a little more like veg. When winter never comes, how industrialized food makes us sick. Abundance and scarcity on the Serengeti. Veg Onsart lived in a world where dinner was never guaranteed. The Serengeti, with its vast plains and teeming wildlife, was, at times, a land of abundance, but not nearly as reliable as whole foods. The shelves of the savanna weren't always stocked. Natural cycles governed when sustenance was plentiful and when it was scant. Veg's survival depended on his ability to navigate these cycles, storing energy during times of plenty and enduring periods of deficit with resilience and adaptation. In the late summer and early autumn, the Serengeti would burst into life. The rains had come and gone, and the landscape was lush with vegetation. Fruit-bearing trees like the baobab and marula were heavy with ripe yield, and the grasslands were swarming with grazing animals that provided ample opportunities for stalking. This was the time when Veg and his tribe would hunt and gather as much as possible, taking full advantage of the seasonal abundance. During this period of plenty, Veg's body, like those of all humans, was biologically primed to store excess calories as fat. This was a crucial adaptation honed over millions of years of evolution. Just as animals fatten up before winter, Veg's body would increase fat stowage, preparing for the leaner months ahead when food would be scarce. As the Serengeti transitioned from autumn to winter, the rains ceased and the landscape began to desiccate. The once abundant vegetation withered, and the herds of wildebeest, zebras, and antelopes moved on in search of greener pastures. Food sources became increasingly sparse, and Veg's tribe had to work harder and travel farther to find sustenance. During these times of scarcity, Veg often found himself in a caloric deficit. The food he could gather or hunt was no longer enough to meet his daily energy needs, and his body began to rely on his fat reserves. This cyclical yin-yang experience of abundance followed by scarcity was a fundamental aspect of his existence, shaping his physiology and survival strategies. Veg's ability to survive and thrive in the Serengeti was a testament to the remarkable adaptability of the human body. The periods of food scarcity that he faced activated a range of physiological responses that not only ensured his survival, but also enhanced his resilience and longevity. Calorie deficit did more than just deplete Veg's fat reserves. It also activated protective pathways in his body. This concept, known as hormesis, describes how low doses of stress, such as intermittent fasting or temporary caloric deficits, can trigger beneficial biological responses. In Veg's case, these periods of scarcity activated pathways that increased his body's resilience to stress and enhanced cellular repair mechanisms. One of the key pathways activated by caloric restriction is the production of sirtuins, proteins that play a crucial role in cellular health and longevity. These proteins help repair DNA, reduce inflammation, and improve metabolic efficiency. Caloric restriction also activated a pathway known as AMPK. The activation of AMPK triggers a process in the body known as autophagy, where dysfunctional senescent cells are broken down into their component building blocks and then upcycled into new functional proteins. AMPK activation also initiates the process of mitobiogenesis, where the body produces new mitochondria, the organelles responsible for making energy. If this is too much science jargon, this is the gist. The scarcity-induced stress that Fedge experienced during winter helped to optimize his body's functionality in myriad ways. Fasten your geek belt for a little food science. Remember Fedge's large haul of figs that I described in the introduction as a means to illustrate the incredible evolutionary mechanisms at play and how modern culture is upending them? Well, figs, like all food, contain macro and micronutrients that the body metabolizes for its many functions. Food is also a messenger. Certain constituents of food provide specific signals to cells to act in certain ways. The molecular makeup of the fig delivers specific directives to the body. A medium-sized fig contains approximately 8 grams of sugar, 60% of which is glucose and the balance is fructose. During digestion, these sugar carbohydrates are absorbed into the bloodstream. The fig's glucose triggers insulin from the pancreas, almost like my daughters use Uber. Glucose hitches a ride from its insulin cabbie and gets taxied to the cell for the process of energy production. Fructose, on the other hand, doesn't have the insulin app on its iPhone, and instead gets directly metabolized by the liver. As the liver catabolizes fructose, chemical compounds called purines are released. The breakdown of purines produces uric acid, which in turn signals your body's cells to become insulin resistant. When a cell develops insulin resistance, less glucose is able to enter it for the production of ATP, and instead it remains in the bloodstream. When glucose loiters in the blood for too long, it has numerous fates. Approximately 500 grams, depending on your body mass, get stored as glycogen in the liver as warehoused energy. Abandoned serum glucose can also form inflammatory glycoproteins, sometimes called advanced glycation end products, by fusing with proteins like hemoglobin. Overwhelmingly, however, blood glucose is stored as triglycerides in adipocytes, commonly known as fat cells. Insulin resistance leads to fat accumulation. In short, the fructose from figs tells your body to get fat. Why would it do that? One theory is that 15 million years ago, during the mid-Miocene Ice Age, the gene for uricase, the enzyme that breaks down uric acid, was silenced in our hominid ancestors. This mutation was adaptive. As colder weather pervaded through Europe, it shortened the growing season and created longer periods of calorie paucity. Evolution stepped slowly in to address food scarcity by turning off the uricase gene and, by extension, helping hominids become insulin resistant and warehouse fat. This mechanism, resulting in fat storage, represents the brilliance of nature's intelligence. Across millennia, the body developed this adaptive mechanism of making Fedge a little fat during the abundant fall harvest because nature knew that the yang of the bright autumn yield would be dimmed by the yin of winter's fallow. Fedge would require fat storage because food supplies naturally dwindle. Copious glucose would dry up. And in order to produce the energy required for life, the body would need to break down triglycerides into free fatty acids and ketones, alternate fuel sources to glucose. As Dr. Richard Johnson quips in his eponymously titled book, Nature Wants Us to Be Fat, our bodies evolved to recognize fructose as a signal of upcoming scarcity and in turn store fat. Amazing. But here's the problem. Culture has now hijacked this evolutionary adaptation and rendered it maladaptive. This is the nature of the comfort trap. It renders advantages disadvantageous. Before unpacking this mismatch, let me qualify. There is still considerable food scarcity in the world, and it is a salient problem that must be addressed as we hurtle into increasing climate volatility. However, most of the Western world suffers from overnutrition, not undernutrition. Significantly more people die from obesity and obesity-related diseases than from starvation. Of course, the standard American diet is among the United States' most prominent exports, so this phenomenon is hardly confined to the West. The overarching point is this: billions of people can now, on a whim, in the palm of their hand or a short drive away, avail themselves of almost any kind of food, in or out of season, on a 365-day per year, 7-day per week, 24-hour per day basis. This phenomenon represents one of our most predominant Big Macs. Abundance is no longer balanced by scarcity. It's figs all day. Well, if only it were. In reality, it is sugary drinks and ultra-processed snacks sweetened with high fructose corn syrup all day and all night. 84% of the items in the average grocery store contain added sugar, generally in the form of some unpronounceable fructose-based compound. It's not just Coke, Oreos, and Skittles. It's salad dressings and pasta sauces, processed meats and potato chips, breakfast cereals and baked goods, many of which are engineered in laboratories to hit your bliss point and trigger your neuropods in your gut to trick your brain into wanting more. The body in response is simply doing what it has evolved to do: store fat. The fact that 45% of Americans are obese is a predictable consequence of the body's adaptive mechanisms being hijacked by culture. What was once adaptive is now maladaptive. The way we now live is mismatched with our biology. We've fallen into a comfort trap. On average, Fedge's daily caloric intake was somewhere between 1,800 and 2,200 calories. The range of Fedge's daily intake fluctuated based on the availability of food. During periods of abundance, he might have consumed 2,500 to 3,000 calories or more, especially after a successful hunt. However, during periods of scarcity, his intake could drop to 1,200 to 1,800 calories, or even lower. Today, in the United States, the surfeit of available calorie-dense ultra-processed food has increased the average daily caloric intake to 3,600. While calorie intake is not the only determinant of weight management, the core principles of thermodynamics have significant application to gaining or losing weight. I will explore this topic in greater depth in the section on sedentariness. Humans are simply not designed to eat massive portions of ultra-processed foods all day, but by and large, that is what we're doing. How did we get here? While there is no historical census data from 10,000 BC, we can assume with great confidence that virtually nobody in Fedge's tribe suffered from obesity or diabetes. Food scarcity, in combination with the physical demands of quotidian life, contributed to a body composition of lean muscle mass and minimal excess fat storage. This low prevalence of obesity was not only a vestige of Paleolithic times, it can actually be observed until relatively recently. In 1900, estimates suggest that obesity rates in the United States and other Western countries hovered around 3% of the adult population. The low rate of obesity during the early 20th century can be attributed to several factors, including diet and levels of physical activity. The diet in 1900 was still based largely on whole foods, including fresh fruits, vegetables, meats, and grains. The consumption of sugar and high-fat foods was much lower than it is today. An average American ate approximately 40 pounds of sugar per year in 1900. Now we are averaging around 170 pounds. Many people engaged in physically demanding labor, whether it was agriculture, manufacturing, or domestic work. This higher level of daily physical activity naturally kept people leaner. And lastly, refrigeration was not yet widespread, forcing people to rely on fresh, seasonal produce and less perishable foods. Relatively low obesity rates persisted through the first half of the 20th century. This period was a particularly challenging time for agriculture and food production in the United States, marked by the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s, caused by a combination of severe drought and harmful farming practices, devastated the American Midwest. Crops failed and the soil turned to dust, leading to widespread hunger and displacement. During the Great Depression, food scarcity was a harsh reality for many. Soup kitchens and bread lines became symbols of the era, as millions of Americans struggled to find enough to eat. In response to food shortages during World War II, people were encouraged to grow victory gardens to supplement their diets. These small, self-sufficient gardens became a symbol of resilience as people turned to their own backyards to feed their families. In 1943, there were more than 20 million victory gardens, which produced 10 billion pounds of food. In 1944, gardens provided an astounding 40% of the domestic vegetable supply. The rates of obesity first began to spike in the United States in the 1950s as post-World War II economic growth and changes in lifestyle took hold. This period saw the dawn of the Green Revolution, a period of intense agricultural innovation that transformed farming from a labor-intensive localized activity into a highly mechanized industrial process. The goal of industrial agriculture was to produce cheap, shelf-stable calories to meet the needs of a growing population. Packaging innovations and artificial preservatives made snacking an increasingly pervasive part of mainstream food culture. The broader industrialization of the food industry was exemplified by the Kellogg Food Company, which went public on the New York Stock Exchange in 1952. That same year, Kellogg's launched Tony the Tiger as the muscular, anthropomorphic feline mascot for its signature Frosted Flakes cereal. In terms of cheap calories, to paraphrase Tony, they're great. But these sugar-coated cornflakes did not come without great cost. What could breakfast cereal possibly have to do with war? Incredibly, the mid-20th century revolution in food production grew directly out of the mindset and infrastructure of the military-industrial complex. For example, during World War II, the production of ammonium nitrate, a key component in explosives, was ramped up for the use in munitions. After the war, there was a surplus of ammonium nitrate, and rather than squandering it, this chemical compound was poured into the soil. Ammonium nitrate is rich in nitrogen, a critical nutrient for plant growth. The adoption of ammonium nitrate as a chemical fertilizer along with synthetic pesticides dramatically increased crop yields in the short term, but at a substantial expense to the environment and human health. Ammonium nitrate led to an imbalance of nutrients in the soil, depriving it of essential nutrients like phosphorus, potassium, and trace elements. This led to soil degradation and nutrient-deficient foods. Additionally, ammonium nitrate acidified the soil, harming beneficial microorganisms that are essential for fixing nitrogen, producing nutrients, and aerating the soil. Increasingly, soil became desiccated and unable to absorb water. Industrial agriculture also promoted monoculture, the practice of growing single crops over large areas, which increased efficiency but also led to further depletion of soil nutrients and the destruction of biodiversity. It is this era that produced the postcard images of rank-on-rank corn and wheat. Increasingly, these cash crops were not used for direct consumption, but as raw materials for various industries. Corn, soybeans, rice, and other cash crops began to serve as the foundation of a wide range of industrial processed products. For example, industrial corn was processed into the high fructose corn syrup that is so ubiquitous in soft drinks and baked goods. Other uses of corn include corn oil for margarine production, corn sugar, also known as dextrose, for baking, corn starch, used as a thickening agent and in the production of some plastics, and corn meal, used as a coating for fried foods. Corn was also used as animal feed on concentrated animal feeding operations, known as CAFOs, and for the production of ethanol. Soy was processed for soybean oil, isolates for meat substitutes, emulsifiers, lubricants, and adhesives. Rice was processed into oils for cooking, and rice starch, used in cosmetics and pharmaceuticals. It is these same monocrops produced by big commercial farms that have been increasingly subsidized through governmental policy. These subsidies allow big food producers, as well as oil and gas and pharmaceutical companies, to manufacture products below the true cost of production and then sell them at prices that do not reflect their environmental or health costs. This phenomenon is one of the primary reasons for why a McDonald's Happy Meal is so cheap. Big food can wring in profits because it externalizes its true costs, as taxpayers are left footing the bill for a healthcare crisis and the environmental cleanup that goes with it. The transformation of subsidized cash crops into seed oils also gave rise to the production of shelf-stable foods, highly processed products that can be stored for long periods without spoiling. Historically, seed oils were often partially hydrogenated to improve their stability. Hydrogenation is a process that adds hydrogen atoms to the oil, converting unsaturated fats to trans fats. This increases the melting point of the oil, making it solid at room temperature, which contributes to the shelf stability of baked goods, margarine, and other processed foods. The health risk of trans fats have been well known for decades. In 1993, Harvard researcher Dr. Walter Willett published a landmark study in the New England Journal of Medicine linking trans fats to heart disease risk among nurses. Despite Willett's study and numerous others, it took the FDA until 2015 to rule that partially hydrogenated oils must be phased out of the U.S. food supply. Initially, it provided food companies with a 3-year grace period to remove trans fat containing foods from the shelves. The purveyors of Oreos, saltine crackers, and Pop-Tarts, among others, fought to extend the deadline another 3 years until 2021. It took almost 3 decades from the time the government knew trans fats were giving us cardiovascular disease to the time these foods were abolished from the shelves of grocery stores. It begs the question, how many heart attacks could have been prevented during this time? Seed oils are also detrimental to health in countless other ways. They are highly caloric. For example, our beloved potato chips are typically made from thinly sliced potatoes that are fried in a mixture of seed oils such as sunflower oil, corn oil, canola oil, and soybean oil. A typical serving size of potato chips is about 1 ounce, 28 grams, which usually equates to around 16 chips. A 1-ounce serving of potato chips can contain around 160 calories. Of these calories, about 10 grams are from fat, and a significant portion of that fat is from the seed oils used for frying. With 9 calories per gram of fat, this means roughly 90 calories per serving come from the seed oil alone. And who just stops at 16 chips? Veg certainly wouldn't. Seed oils are also high in omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids, PUFAs. While omega-6 fatty acids are essential for health, the modern diet often includes a skewed ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. A high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio has been linked to chronic inflammation, which is a risk factor for many diseases, including heart disease, cancer, and autoimmune disorders. Some studies suggest that a diet high in omega-6 fatty acids, such as those found in seed oils, may contribute to insulin resistance, a precursor to type 2 diabetes. Profit over health, the tobacco industry's foray into big food. The mismatch between lifestyle and biology has been further exacerbated by large corporate interests who have prioritized profits over human health. The culprits most guilty of this nefarious behavior have been somewhat surprisingly the world's largest tobacco companies. In the 1980s, as the government began to crack down on cigarette advertising, regulation, and public smoking, major tobacco companies faced declining sales and increasing legal pressures. To diversify their portfolios and maintain profitability, these companies began acquiring large food companies, capitalizing on their expertise in marketing and consumer behavior to dominate the processed food industry. In essence, when it got more difficult for the tobacco industry to market the products that give people lung cancer, they turned their focus towards marketing products that cause obesity and diabetes. These companies honed their expertise in consumer psychology, marketing tobacco products, and then applied it to the food industry. They actively studied human biology in order to leverage our built-in mechanisms against us, using techniques such as optimizing the bliss point, the perfect combination of sugar, salt, and fat that triggers the brain's pleasure centers and encourages overconsumption. They also employed aggressive advertising strategies similar to those used for cigarettes. In 1985, Philip Morris, one of the world's largest tobacco companies and purveyor of the Marlboro and Parliament brands, acquired General Foods for $5.6 billion. General Foods was a major player in the food industry, owning brands like Jell-O and Kool-Aid. 3 years later, in 1988, Philip Morris made an even bigger move by acquiring the behemoth Kraft Foods for $12.9 billion. This acquisition created the largest food company in the United States. Under Philip Morris's ownership, Kraft became synonymous with ultra-processed food products including Kraft macaroni and cheese, Oscar Mayer meats, cheese singles, and numerous other snack foods. Not to be outdone, in the same year of 1985, R.J. Reynolds, another tobacco giant known for the Camel and Newport brands, acquired Nabisco brands for $4.9 billion. Nabisco was a leading producer of snack foods, including iconic products like Oreos, Ritz crackers, and Chips Ahoy cookies. Like Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds used its deep understanding of addiction and consumer habits to enhance the appeal of its food products. They emphasized convenience and taste, often at the expense of nutritional value, to keep consumers coming back for more. The use of aggressive marketing tactics, including heavy advertising to children and the placement of products at eye level in supermarkets, helped to anchor these foods in the American diet. Highly palatable, addictive foods are just another drug with a huge profit margin. The impact on public health. The public health implications of tobacco giants becoming America's biggest food purveyors has been catastrophic. Maximizing sugar, fat, and salt content makes foods irresistible and almost impossible for consumers to eat in moderation. These foods trigger dopamine responses in the brain similar to addictive substances, directly contributing to a concomitant rise in obesity, diabetes, and other diet-related diseases. Just as they had with cigarettes, these companies targeted vulnerable populations, specifically children. Marketing efforts included everything from colorful packaging to more Tony the Tiger-like mascots to cartoon-based advertising and the sponsorship of school events. The Kool-Aid Man, for example, is one of the most iconic mascots in advertising history. He is the large anthropomorphic pitcher filled with Kool-Aid, bursting through the walls to the catchphrase, "Oh yeah." To be fair, this type of insidious advertising predates the tobacco industry's entry into the food business. The Barnum circus animals of Nabisco's animal crackers date all the way back to 1902. The three mischievous gnome-like brothers, Snap, Crackle, and Pop, have been hawking Rice Krispies since 1933. The Trix Rabbit has been trying to turn tricks since 1959. "Silly rabbit, tricks are for kids," was his refrain. We've been cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs since 1962. Count Chocula has been failing to count calories since 1971. Cookie Jarvis has been casting magical spells to enhance Chips Ahoy cookies since 1977. These mascots were created to make food products more appealing and memorable to children through fun, imaginative characters. Most of these mascots are still iconic today, despite changing food marketing regulations. It's mind-boggling how deeply entrenched these slogans are in my psyche. These products are cheaper than whole foods, thanks again to government subsidies for ingredients like corn and soy, making them an attractive option for budget-conscious consumers, but contributing to poor health outcomes. In 2000, Philip Morris, which had been renamed Altria Group, sold off parts of its food business. Kraft Foods was partially spun off through an IPO, raising $8.6 billion. Over the next decade, Altria gradually divested its remaining stake in Kraft. R.J. Reynolds sold Nabisco to Philip Morris in 2000 for $18.9 billion, netting a tidy $14 billion profit. Of course, it is during this very period that there was a dramatic escalation in obesity and diabetes. Over the same time span, there has also been a proportional increase in healthcare costs as more Americans were prescribed pharmaceutical drugs to address the symptoms of chronic disease. Insulin, metformin, and more recently GLP-1 agonists like Ozempic and Wegovy have become ubiquitous and massively profitable for drug companies. To add yet another wrinkle to the face of the giant mismatch between culture and biology, I'd be remiss not to mention that massive asset management firms like BlackRock own significant stakes in many big food companies, including Coke, PepsiCo, Conagra, Kraft Heinz, Kellogg's, and General Mills. BlackRock also owns large stakes in many of the biggest pharmaceutical companies, such as Merck, Johnson & Johnson, Norvetis, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and others. So, the same investment group owns the companies that make us sick and also owns the companies that produce pharmaceutical drugs to address the symptoms of our diseases and never the root causes. There is a gruesome incentive at play to make people sick and then hook them for life on the drugs that allay only the most acute presentations of disease. The same group owns the poison and the antidote to the poison. And of course, BlackRock also owns massive stakes in the biggest defense contractors, including Lockheed, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and General Dynamics. In the blink of an eye, from the perspective of evolution, we went from backyard gardens to the same investment firm, simultaneously owning the company that produces the stealth bomber and the companies making the food and drugs we put in our children's mouths. If the corporate capture of our most fundamental industries strikes you as deeply unsettling, it is. But there is no reason to feel despondent. We have more agency over what we put in our mouths than any other part of our daily life. We can effect slow but radical change, one forkful at a time. What to do? In stark contrast to Fedge's life on the savannah, modern humans live in an environment of constant food availability. The cycles of abundance and scarcity that once shaped our biology have been replaced by an unending surplus of calories. The modern diet is characterized by an overabundance of industrially produced, calorie-dense, ultra-processed foods that are available at all hours of the day. This constant availability has disrupted the natural cycles of fasting and feeding that our bodies are designed for and create an evolutionary mismatch. Humans are simply not engineered to eat Twinkies and Pop-Tarts all day long, every day of the year. Without the natural periods of scarcity to regulate fat storage, modern humans continue to store fat year-round, leading to obesity. The once beneficial adaptation of fat storage has become maladaptive, contributing to the rise of metabolic diseases such as type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and hypertension. The absence of mild periodic stressors like food scarcity means that the protective pathways that Pheg's body regularly activated are rarely engaged in modern humans. This lack of hormetic stress contributes to the accumulation of cellular damage, inflammation, and accelerated aging. In order to realign our lifestyle with our biology, we must now deliberately self-impose short-term acute stress protocols like intermittent fasting, and we must resist the engineered allure of industrial food and readopt an ancestral whole foods diet. In my book, Good Stress, I delve deep into the protocols, historical roots, and benefits of fasting, the symbiotic dance between external and internal environments moved in synchrony for millennia until unfettered capitalism upended the logic of human physiology. In order to address the mismatch between our lifestyle and our biology, we need to ask, how did I evolve? We need to live a little more like Pheg.